In order to reach the independent free United States of America that we see today, Americans needed guns and money to free the land. Everything started after winning the war against the British in 1781 and buying the other part of the land from the French in 1803 for $15 million only. After winning the land, they needed to start the discovery mission, but that mission was impossible, especially using horses to discover the Wild West. So in 1855, 70 Arabian camels with a man named Hajj Ali came all the way from the Middle East to discover the Wild West from Texas to California. Americans changed his name from Hajj Ali to Hajj Ali and asked him to lead 1,000 more Arabian camels and continue the discovery. Everything stopped in 1861 because of the Civil War. He continued after the war and succeeded to deliver the discovery and become an American legend. After dying in 1902, a monument was built with his name on by the government in Arizona. I am now in the Wild West and the equation is still the same. Americans still use guns and money to keep their land free. Hi sir. Good, everything's good. قاعد تصور صح؟ حاليا الساعة 6:15 الصبح، لحظة الشروق، حاليا على حدود الباسو في تكساس. هذه أمريكا، هذه جبال تكساس، هذه المكسيك، وهذا الجدار العازل ما بين المكسيك وأمريكا. يلا رجعنا سيارتنا. Good morning. Thank you again for having us, and this is a gift for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. This lovely place, historical place. We really enjoyed every single second of it. And of course, it's not only about the shapes, it's because of the people that we've met.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for having us.
I love flowers. It's the best present for me.
Thank you very much,
Thanks a lot. Feel at home.
Thank
Please,
you.
you're
Can we
welcome.
go inside?
Thank you.
Thank you. I asked even President Fox about who is behind the marketing campaign that he's done in his presidency, and how Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger said when he was shooting a movie here in Mexico, he said, I saw this candidate that is doing something else. Usually politicians wear suit, ties, and there he is, a cowboy with a business background coming from Coca-Cola and acting differently. So was that your idea?
He was kind of a cowboy, always living in this ranch. Of course, as you know, he was the businessman, such a very important president in Coca-Cola. But to be a politician and to be sincere with the people, you don't have to give a different image about what you really are. What we decided for him was to let him be as he was. Humble, simple, near to the people, with a different language, speaking loudly and clearly. He always says, even now, what he has to say. And the campaign, it was exactly the same. The people wants to feel people and to know that those candidates that want to have the power to serve.
Hello, Osman. How are you?
How are you, Mr. Nelson?
My pleasure to see you.
I'm ready for the tour.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
Take us through this.
Let's go.
So now this place is 600 years
No, more than 400 years. The family started around the beginning of the 1900s, the Fox family, okay?
Yes.
So you're coming from where now, you say?
I came from Los Angeles.
LA, okay.
We've been in Arizona. We've been all over the West Coast, the South Coast, so we've been everywhere.
This is a nice draw of Marta and Vicente, very beautiful. So you have all this, full of this. They are very old and not too old. And then
80, 90 years.
we have basically 4 of them. So we have groups coming in and we do a special dinner. But if you go to Vicente Fox houses, you will see this.
Yes.
There are plenty of those. Probably you went already with Central Fox and you saw many of those.
Yes.
And they are coming from different gifts. And he's crazy for horses.
But now he did 2 surgeries in his back, so he stopped.
He's not using it, but the children's and the grandchildren's.
Yeah, of course.
And me.
And you.
Okay, of course there are many pictures of
President Fox.
Senor Fox, which is drawn by different people that give it them as a present, etc.
The flag is perfect. لابس كمام. اوكي وصل. Hello, Mr. President. Thank you for having us. Thank you very much. Hola. Good morning, madam. Thank you very much. I'm good. How are you? Amazing. We had the best 2 days ever in your amazing place.
President Bush came on visit to Mexico before he went to Canada, things that had never happened before. So he came here to this ranch with his wife, and we stopped by the rancho, by the family home, today the hotel, and he came in and gave a big kiss to my mother. Well, my mother went crazy. The most powerful man in the world coming in all the way from Washington, flying on that impressive airplane and 3 airplanes that he bring, all the Suburbans and all the black Cadillacs coming in through this ranch. Imagine, it was to everybody was impressive, and to my mother so. And then we went home, where I live today. When the time came that we built up for a revolutionary migration initiative, migration law that we presented to Congress, President Bush and his team, but I participated on building up that initiative, is when he invited me to come to an official visit to Washington.
I remember very clearly how President Fox addressed the 2 Congress in the United States, talking about just the issue of migration.
Members of the Congress, it's my great privilege, and I deem it a high honor and personal pleasure to present to you His Excellency Vicente Fox, President of the United Mexican States. Mr. President.
So we were there 3 days, Mark and myself. 2 days I spent in Congress, speaking to political groups, speaking to each of the commissions that had to do with the initiative and the new law that was about to be approved. We agreed on what was going to be with Congress, the Senate, and congressmen.
And how President Bush and President Fox agreed to put a program together with discipline, of course, according with law, to be able to have a discipline and migration with dignity.
No two nations are more important to the immediate prosperity and well-being of one another than Mexico and the United States. I think I did it quite well. A lot of applauses and a lot of support. So we almost signed, but exactly 2 days after that visit, September the 11th came about.
And everything was completely changed.
We crashed! The other trade center's down! Come on, you gotta get out of here! Watch out, watch out. Everybody go straight to...
These two letters say,
Even in a very organized trip or a plan, things happen and change everything dramatically. Americans use the term out of the blue to describe this situation. We knew, or the world knows, how your brother received that news. He received it with 11 famous words, and then in a classroom addressing to children, talking about freedom and democracy in Florida. And your parents were in a flight, and their plane was forced to change its way. Where were you?
I had arrived in the late afternoon of September the 10th at Dallas Airport, flying in from Germany with my wife. And we spent, a quiet evening unpacking our suitcases. And I went to my new office in the embassy rather early. This was going to be my first day in the office. I knew I was going to meet with staff, the military attaché, defense attaché, political section of the embassy, etc. during the day. And we would start figuring out when should I make a courtesy call on the State Department, Secretary Powell at the time, and of course other government departments.
The night before, I was having dinner with my brother in Sarasota, Florida, and with a group of friends and supporters, both of my election as well as his. And we talked about a book that he was reading, and coincidentally, one of the other people in the room for dinner was reading as well about the Civil War. So the night before was like any other, presidential visit. You have dinner, you have friends after the work, and I went back to Tallahassee because I had a cabinet meeting that I had to attend to.
So it was supposed to be, an initial day of meeting people, getting acquainted with my own embassy staff, which was a rather large embassy, several hundred people. And so I went to the office early at 8:15 or so. The cleaning lady was still there. They had not expected me that early.
Do you remember the moment when it happened? Where were you?
Yeah, I think every American will tell you, and perhaps everybody in the world can tell you where they were, when 9/11 happened. And I happened to be in the number 2 position at FBI Miami, Florida.
But when I read this book, I've read how do you describe the day of 11th of September? Who was working in the,
The Pentagon? My father...
Your father was in the Pentagon?
No, my father was in the Coast Guard.
Yeah, sorry.
Building. My grandfather was the one we thought might have been in the Pentagon because he was working for the FBI at the time.
And your mother was already retired, but...
No, my mother worked for the district courts in Baltimore.
Yeah. So, and you were at that time in the...
Working on Fort Meade, just for a private company that was from somebody who lived on Fort Meade.
I was at CIA headquarters. I was in a
morning meeting with the CIA leadership.
Some 20 minutes later, my secretary arrived and my assistant, my special assistant, whom I had known earlier, they came in, they showed me how to use the phone and how to turn on the television, etc. So, you know, I started, I got a cup of coffee, and the first meeting was supposed to be at 9:30.
And someone came into the room and said that the World Trade Center in New York City has been hit by a plane. We didn't know if it was an accident. We didn't know the size of the plane. And then I went back to my office and I was watching the television as that first tower was smoldering.
And then at about 9 o'clock or a couple of minutes after 9 o'clock, my assistant came rushing in and said, "Ambassador, turn on your television set. Something is happening in New York. It's on CNN." And I didn't find this little thing. Took me a minute or so, but I think I was able to see the third replay of the initial scene, you know, when the first airplane hit the towers in New York.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. CNN Center right now is just beginning to work on this story, obviously calling our sources and trying to figure out exactly what happened, but clearly something relatively devastating happening this morning there on the south end of the island of Manhattan.
And I saw the second plane hit the other tower. At that moment, I think everybody in CIA knew that it was Al-Qaeda, because we knew that they were trying to carry out an attack.
Perhaps purposefully into, oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one. Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness.
Another plane?
Now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Sadly, the intelligence community understood that something was being planned prior to 9/11. We had a very high-ranking CIA official come in and tell us, we are all very concerned. Here is the kind of chatter we're seeing through electronic eavesdropping and intercepts of communications of known and suspected Al-Qaeda members. They are clearly excited about something. They clearly are moving resources somewhere, and they're already kind of celebrating a kind of victory that they think is going to happen. Do you think it's going to happen here in the United States? And the answer was, yeah, we think so. Do you think it will be a small attack or it will be a large, iconic attack? And they said, look, the way these people are talking sounds like large and iconic.
And when that happened, I think everybody felt that we, the United States, was under attack in our homeland, basically for the first time. Certainly the first time since Pearl Harbor was attacked back in 1941.
So I was at the cabinet meeting when the planes hit World Trade Center, and immediately closed the meeting and went to the Emergency Operations Center, and tried to call my brother, which finally I talked to him that evening, not during the day, because he was also in the air. And I called my parents, who had been grounded, I think, in Wisconsin, in a small airport, and they were fine. And then I went about the job of trying to identify what are the targets that could happen in Florida, because there was a lot of uncertainty about were there more planes.
15, 20 minutes later was a kind of a black cloud of smoke showing up at my office window. This is a modern building with large windows overlooking Washington on a hillside in Georgetown. So there was this black cloud of smoke. And then, of course, by that time, the CNN was reporting that a plane had actually hit the Pentagon.
And we also have a report now that it was a plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and we have a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is being evacuated.
In my naivete, I said, no, this is really serious. In New York and here, another airplane crashing. Get me the driver. I said, get me the driver. I'm going to go. I want to see what's happening. So I actually got my driver, the embassy car, and I drove in the direction of the Pentagon, and believe it or not, I made it up to maybe 300 yards or so. And then there was already a police barricade. They didn't let me go further. I got out of my car to walk as closely as I could to the Pentagon. There was a large lawn part in front of me, and the heat from the burning kerosene from the Pentagon was so overwhelming that even 300 yards away, it was too hot for me.
On September 10th, life was pretty normal. And on September 11th, he became a wartime president, and it did change everything. It changed his life for sure, and changed his time as president for sure. And it changed our country. There was no doubt about it.
Chancellor Schröder, Chancellor at the time, gave a speech a day later where he echoed our report. He said, Germany is now offering unconditional solidarity. He said unconditional solidarity. He went even a step further. So for me, these first hours, these first few days, 9/11 and the consequence, of course, changed my entire tenure in America. I was there for almost 6 years as an ambassador, and I think every single day of these 6 years would have been very, very different had 9/11 not happened.
How much did America change after 11th of September? How much did the CIA change?
It had a profound impact, not only on the US government and CIA, but also on the American people.
That was a wake-up call for us in the FBI, because we realized this is the moment in history where the FBI has to become something else. It has to move from an investigative agency only to an intelligence agency that can predict and prevent the bad thing from happening.
It was a call to arms, and everybody knew that they had a job to do.
After 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was created. An entire large agency was created, and a very senior position called the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, was created to oversee the entire intelligence community agencies. That was a direct result of a realization that this was very stovepiped. The U.S. intelligence community was very much, we've got ours, you get yours. And the DNI was created to oversee all of that. And the Department of Homeland Security really to kind of coordinate that whole notion that all of us have to pull together to protect the homeland.
I want to thank the director of the FBI and the director of the CIA for waging an incredibly important part on the two-front war, one overseas and a front here at home.
War at home, war abroad. Is either one under control? The latest on the investigation. Congress passes a sweeping new anti-terrorism bill as the international hunt continues for the terrorists behind the September 11th attacks and for the source of the latest wave of bioterrorism. Congress, the White House, and the Pentagon have all been mighty busy this week. But what more do we know after a week of shifting messages? Today, the president signed a big new anti-terrorism bill that would expand the government's ability to track down terrorists, but at some cost. This is what the president had to say today.
As of today, we're changing the laws governing information sharing. And as importantly, we're changing the culture of our various agencies.
We worked very closely with the FBI, with the US military, and during the presidencies of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, I think there was very, very strong efforts made to do everything possible to bring bin Laden to justice.
When we look at the September 11th attacks, we know who's in the wrong, because it's obvious. We have people who are killing thousands of innocent people who have done nothing, right? But on the other hand, you have the American government who declares war on Afghanistan and Iraq, and 1 million people, most of whom are innocent, die in the response. There's something in between these, through aggression, we kill 3,000 people on 9/11. Through aggression, we kill 1 million people to punish the 12 guys who killed 3,000 people.
I mean, number says that it's not only about the 3,000, the tragedy of the 3,000. It's more than 1 million people were killed after such attack. Whom to blame for all those, for the million or more people died because after that attack?
And I think this is the nature, this gets to the nature of what government is supposed to be. Government is supposed to correct for the worst of the human condition in the most narrow way. Because the power of government is something close to ultimate, something close to supreme.
The United States invaded Afghanistan, tried to destroy Al-Qaeda, but also the CIA was asked by President Bush to design this detention interrogation program that I think was very unfortunate in terms of the tactics that we used to try to get the Al-Qaeda operatives to talk.
Why do we have courts? Why, when we arrest someone, do we bother to have a trial? It's not for the person who's accused of the crime so much as it is for the society. The process of courts and the establishing of justice is actually to restrain the government.
You dreamed in your early days to be a priest. And even you said that I wanted to be the first American Pope in the Vatican. And then you turned to be the director of CIA. So I'm just checking this point, is that I know that you've described this, but the count is, they say, around 1,700 civilians, but among kids and women, died. Those are huge numbers. I know that you've explained it a lot, and I'm grateful how you've explained this, but don't you think that this is one of the reasons why it's so different between being a pope or the director of CIA? I know even if it was by accident, but more than 1,700.
I don't agree with that number. The Obama administration did an analysis during its first 7 years in office of how many civilians were killed. And we came up with an estimate of between, I think it was 65 and 120 or 150 or so. And the number was probably, throughout the course of the 8 years of the Obama administration, maybe 150 or 200 civilians. And again, tragic, far too many. But there weren't the 1,700 or so that a lot of people claim. They were exaggerations. They were intentionally misrepresenting the facts. But we did a careful analysis throughout the course of the Obama administration. And these were the number of deaths, civilian deaths, as a result of not just drone strikes, but also missile strikes and strikes by aircraft. And it was around 100 or 120 or so. If 9/11 didn't happen, I think the Middle East would be a lot different today. The CIA, I think, would be a lot different today, because in the aftermath of 9/11, the CIA's counterterrorism program expanded significantly.
That's the sad truth. When we look at the systems of mass surveillance as they exist, these were never public safety programs. Terrorism was the justification to gain these powers. It was to explain to the public why new mass surveillance systems were necessary. But when you look in the reporting from 2013 and onwards about how they were actually being applied, how they were actually being used, it's traditional intelligence.
The lives of countless Americans depend on our ability to monitor these communications.
It's economic espionage, it's diplomatic manipulation, it's social influence. They simply want to know everything about everyone, because if you have that in a database, you can search for anything. Any secret is no secret to you. if you're able to read, everyone's communications.
Our intelligence professionals must be able to find out who the terrorists are talking to, what they're saying, and what they're planning.
We are, as humans, afraid of the unexpected to a much greater degree than we are afraid of the expected.
To put it bluntly, if the enemy is calling into America, we really need to know what they're saying. And we need to know what they're thinking. And we need to know who they're talking to. This is a different kind of struggle that we've ever faced before.
There are much greater costs to the United States from economic inequality, from the homeless issue, from mass shootings, from all of these other problems that you've described, than there is from the rare threat of terrorism. And we know this, even counting September 11th. When you look at, the Western world, counting all of Europe, terrorist attacks from the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, and you look to today, fewer people are dying to terrorism now than 60 to 70 years ago. Even though terrorists today have better weapons, they have stronger bombs, they have more training, they're more international.
It's essential that we understand the mentality of these killers. And so therefore, we worked with Congress to pass the Protect America Act, which everybody knows has expired. And I want to share with you the core of the problem. And the problem is, should companies who, are believed to have helped us after 9/11 till today get information necessary to protect the country be sued? And my answer is absolutely not. They shouldn't be sued.
After 11th of September, no doubt that America has clearly announced the beginning of its war to save the American freedom. And no doubt, all security agencies had all what they need and beyond to make sure that nothing will be a source of shock in any given day. But the world has changed, and the World Wide Web and the social media platforms become aware of everyone's life even more than themselves. We've met a governor and a CIA director and the FBI director. And I don't need you to answer any question. I'll tell you, do you care to know what is their answer when I ask them who has more power and access to Americans' people data? Is it CIA or FBI or Facebook? Do you care to know what's their answer?
I think we all think about privacy and value privacy, and I think it's an interesting and challenging question. I would be interested in what they say.
Private sector has far more accessibility into our private lives, our personal data, than the government would ever dream of having. And there are virtually no rules regarding it. If the government wants to get into our banking data, our communications, they're going to need some legal process. They're going to need a subpoena, a search warrant signed by a judge or magistrate. That doesn't happen with Facebook.
Who knows better about the private lives of American citizens? Is it Mark Zuckerberg or the director of CIA or NSA? I've asked something related to Facebook to the CIA director and to the FBI and even the governor, that who has more accessibility to individuals in America, to citizens, the American citizens? Is it Mark Zuckerberg or the director of CIA? What do you think?
Well, I think they would all say Mark Zuckerberg because they would key on the fact that you said American citizens, and they would go, oh, no, we don't spy on Americans, we spy on foreigners.
Well, the director of CIA and director of NSA are not supposed to be finding out about American citizens. Their responsibility is foreign intelligence. And so there are very strict legal prohibitions that prevent the CIA or NSA from looking at the activities of U.S. citizens. The director of FBI, that's his or her responsibility. But clearly, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, they have tremendous insight into the interests of Americans, you know, the types of things that Americans like or dislike, what they are saying.
I hope as a person living in this country that our government would have the power, so.
Just imagine. That was their irresponsible answer. But you know what they said? They said the government have guns, but Facebook doesn't.
Certainly, these private entities and social media platforms have a lot of information about us, but they can't arrest us.
But the reality is, Facebook has an enormous amount of information about everyone, everywhere. They don't care if you're American or if you're Japanese. If they see information, they will collect it.
So the concern about what harms a private company could do are different from what harms a law enforcement agency can do.
Selling our data, knowing what we are searching for on the internet, and then selling to advertisers that information.
If Google or Apple or Facebook or any of these companies that have very wide access to private devices of people around the world wanted to engage in any kind of spying, they could do horrifying things, truly beyond imagination.
We need the cooperation of telecommunication companies. If these companies are subjected to lawsuits, that could cost them billions of dollars, they won't participate. They won't help us. They won't help protect America.
But again, since 9/11, what we've had is a marriage between corporations and these platforms and the FBI, where it's unclear where the line is between them. You know, and this came up shortly after 9/11 in one of the Patriot Act programs, where the FBI and the phone companies created an office where they sat together.
There is no comparison between what those companies own and access versus what the government has the ability to access.
So that the FBI could more quickly write up what's called a national security letter, a request for information, and hand it to the guy sitting next to them who would pull the information and give them. But because of that familiarity, it became, I'll write one of those, give me the information, and eventually became, you just pull it up on your computer and I'll look over your shoulder.
But the US government can gain access to any information that Facebook has. They can also gain information to any information that Google has, or Amazon has, or Netflix, or whoever. Any American company can be compelled by the United States government to provide information on the basis of a national security demand.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Well, the American intelligence community still intercepts an enormous amount of communications by tapping the cables that connect the world, by hacking systems individually, by creating backdoors and equipment that are then sold to companies around the world.
Unfortunately, because so much of our lives are now digital, my phone company that has the information about who I call, it's my internet provider who has my emails sitting on their server. It's my bank that knows how and when I spend my money, my credit card company. So those third parties can cooperate with the FBI to give that information to the FBI.
But the FBI cannot just go and look into the private lives of American citizens. There are laws against that.
The FBI has very powerful tools to look at all of us now. So when the FBI has suspicion of criminality, they have very powerful tools. And Unfortunately, the way the FBI's rules have changed since 9/11, they can now start employing those tools before they have any suspicion of criminality. And then in their cooperating agreements with other agencies like the National Security Agency, they can get access to information collected through other programs. So the amount of information that they have on hand, they don't need to have a dossier anymore that has Mike German written on the top and then information stuck in it. All that information is in different databases. But when they search those different databases for Mike German, all of that information can be brought together very quickly.
To save the freedom of privacy, is it by putting more regulations on those companies or giving more accessibility for the security force or for the police or for the CIA or FBI? Where should the effort go to?
We need to apply some stricter regulation to private sector and social media platforms. Google knows far more about us and our search histories and what we prefer. And listen, you don't need to listen to me. Let's listen to the CEOs of those companies. They're telling us that they can't do this anymore. They want help. They want regulation. And I would say that we should probably stop calling them social media. They're not media. They are far more like a public utility that needs public regulation and laws applied to them.
Mark Zuckerberg thinks regulation is inevitable, so he's proposing what that regulation should look like. In an op-ed in the Washington Post and on his Facebook page, he outlines what he calls new rules for the internet for 4 key areas: harmful content, election integrity, privacy, and data portability, saying he wants regulators to set standards about what counts as terrorist propaganda or inappropriate content, or whether an ad is political, so the company doesn't have to set those standards and is not accused of bias.
And that's disappointing to me, because I think you should make that commitment, and maybe what we could do is follow up with you on this if possible.
On your point about regulation, the internet is growing in importance around the world in people's lives, and I think that it is inevitable that there will need to be some regulation. So my position is not that there should be no regulation, but I also think that you have to be careful about what regulation you put in place for a lot of the reasons that you're saying. I think a lot of times regulation, by definition, puts in place rules that a company that is larger, that has resources like ours, can easily comply with, but that might be more difficult for a smaller startup to comply with. So I think that these are all things that need to be thought through very carefully when thinking through what rules we want to put in place.
You've mentioned democratizing the content, and that was what also the founder of YouTube told me in an interview when I asked him what did really YouTube affected the world.
Osman.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for having us in your house.
Yes, thanks for coming and pleasure having you.
And congratulations for the Eagles.
Oh yes, good birds.
Thank you, after you.
Yeah, please, after you.
Thank you. Many believe that Kennedy won against Nixon because of the TV debate. Many people believe that YouTube gave a better chance for Obama to win.
Yes.
Do you believe that?
Yes, YouTube helped Obama and Twitter helped Trump.
He said, I created this platform, YouTube, to give the chance for anyone that has a content can share it.
It's amazing.
But he believes that it's even more controlled now. So, I mean, you know how it is in social media. We thought that everyone has his own column. Before, if you want to write a piece of article, you need to go to a certain newspaper, the traditional media tools.
Yeah.
Then suddenly there is Twitter, for example. And then Twitter shows that now it's also is under control, if I may say. I mean, it's not...
Well, they have to censor. They have to, and they're not good at it. They're horrible at it. They're not really good at censoring. So the supreme leader in Iran, his Twitter feed isn't banned, but Donald Trump's is. I mean, come on, it's crazy.
I think it needs to get better. I think because of social media and YouTube and Facebook, we have now reached the point where everyone can have a voice. And that's for good and for bad. There are some people that have a voice that you might disagree with, and you might not like the voice that they have. But I think what that has done, it has taken the power out of, the hands of what used to be only a small handful of media.
I hope he isn't disappointed in what he created, because he should be very proud of it.
He is, but he believes what I'm gonna just say now.
I think, the world is really changing. It's only been a few years that everyone had the opportunity to be their own television studio and their own movie network. And so, I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Chad Hurley's sense at the beginning is to democratize the content, but now I wanted to know your opinion upon that. Does that now, after having Netflix, after having YouTube, after having Facebook, Twitter, etc., isn't it the right time now to change having democracy under a certain law or organizing? Why I'm saying that? I'm saying that because before, politics was only for who care. So people with knowledge go and vote. Now, because of social media, trends are set in seconds, in minutes. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe this is the topic that you've talked about, that Trump wouldn't win if it was the period of Reagan or Bush.
And then another case in point, specifically as it relates to Cambridge Analytica, where in December of 2015, that Dr. Kogan and Cambridge Analytica misappropriated data from 87 million Facebook users.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what other people discussed.
How much revenue did Facebook earn from the user engagement that resulted from foreign propaganda?
Well, Senator, what we do know is that the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, the Russian firm, ran about $100,000 worth of ads. I can't say that we've identified all of the foreign actors who are involved here, so I can't say that that's all of the money, but that is what we have identified.
I know what Cambridge Analytica did because they came to pitch me. We have this psychological profile we use for voters, and this is how we do it. It was totally in the open. And I said, oh, no, thanks. Not interested in it.
Why?
It was untested. It wasn't whether I believed it or not. It was very expensive, and it was untested. And it was a little, like I believe in, I'm a libertarian in many ways. It makes me nervous for the same reasons these questions you're asking sincerely. It makes me nervous when people try to manipulate the outcome. They had clients in the United States, a couple of them, I believe, including Trump for a brief period. But how do you determine whether that their algorithms end up having any effect on the election?
I understand what Governor Bush is saying. There is no technical evidence that you can say, aha, look what they did. But they stole emails from John Podesta and they pushed them out through WikiLeaks. They did go out with a lot of their propaganda in the social media environment. And there were repeated contacts between Trump campaign officials and Russians, including Russians who were affiliated with Russian intelligence.
Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook recently announced that a search feature allowing malicious actors to scrape data on virtually all of Facebook's 2 billion users. Yes or no? In 2013, Brandon Copley, the CEO of Giftnix, demonstrated that this feature could easily be used to gather information at scale. Well, the answer to that question is yes. Facebook has detailed profiles on people who have never signed up for Facebook, yes or no?
Congressman, in general, we collect data for people who have not signed up for Facebook for security purposes to prevent the kind of scraping that you were just referring to.
So these are called shadow profiles? Is that what they've been referred to by some?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll refer to them as shadow profiles for today's hearing. On average, how many data points does Facebook have on each Facebook user?
I do not know off the top of my head.
So the average for non-Facebook platforms is 1,500. It's been reported that Facebook has as many as 29,000 data points for an average Facebook user. Do you know how many points of data that Facebook has on the average non-Facebook user?
Congressman, I do not off the top of my head, but I can have our team get back to you afterwards.
I appreciate that. It's been admitted by Facebook that you do collect data points on non-average users. So my question is, can someone who does not have a Facebook account opt out of Facebook's involuntary data collection?
Congressman, anyone can turn off and opt out of any data collection for ads, whether they use our services or not.
You've said everyone controls their data, but you're collecting data on people that are not even Facebook users, that have never signed a consent, a privacy agreement, and you're collecting their data.
There should be a Bill of Rights about how you can use this information, or you can opt in. In other words, right now, effectively, if you read the 5,000 word, single-spaced, impossible to read print, you're basically giving away all your privacy when you have to opt out. And I'm imagining that the vast majority of people do not do that.
A lot has changed since 11th of September. A lot happened because of 11th of September. Scandal led to another and another. The result? Huge complex, where it's not clear anymore who is the victim and who's the assailant, who is the hero and who is the traitor.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
I would say that they certainly had flawed judgment in what they did. I think that they were desperate. They were fearful about what might happen to the United States from Al-Qaeda, and therefore they forgot, I think, some of those principles that make this country strong.
America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining.
Interrogation program and other types of things, and detaining individuals at these black sites or at Guantanamo, I do think are inconsistent with our democratic principles. And I think it was very, very unfortunate, regretful, and wrong that our government engaged in that. I think it certainly tarnished America's image around the globe, which I think is still tarnished as a result of it. And I always had the feeling, certainly when I joined CIA, that America was supposed to be that shining light on the hill, and that it was supposed to show by its example how nations and countries and governments should act.
That's a crime. That causes harm to the United States. That makes more enemies, that makes people more desperate, and it makes more people resort to violence. And you call the people who are telling us the truth the criminals. That's a problem.
What was it you said earlier about Snowden?
I said that I thought he ought to be brought back to the United States and tried before a jury of his peers if convicted of treason, which is, I think, the appropriate charge.
Didn't you say you thought he had blood on his hands?
It's still a capital crime, and I would give him the death sentence, and I would prefer to see him hanged by the neck until he was dead rather than merely electrocuted.
He's not only had his own career. Both his parents, one served in the FBI and the other served in the CIA. So he come from a how can I say it, patriotic family.
Right.
You know, it's tough to see the truth and feel that.
Right.
يعني I can't imagine this. يعني you gave a lot. You're not saying it out of like any journalist talking. You've been there. You gave a lot.
There's not some personal benefit in it.
Yes.
There's not.
So it's pure.
I think so. And, certainly I wasn't willing to take the risks that Edward Snowden took. Yeah.
Whoa.
And so I commend his courage in that way. But the reason that the world knows more about what Edward Snowden provided to the public is because he went outside the rules.
No, I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot.
I mean, I'm not that aware of the Snowden situation, but I'm going to start looking at it. There are many, many people, it seems to be a split decision. That many people think that he should be somehow treated differently, and other people think he did very bad things. And I'm going to take a very good look at it, okay? I mean, I've seen people that are very conservative and very liberal, and they agree on the same issue. They agree both ways. I'm going to take a look at that very strongly. Edward Snowden. Yeah, please.
You think Edward Snowden was a traitor in revealing that?
I can never condone what he did. You know, he stole millions of documents. And the great irony is the vast majority of those documents had nothing to do with American civil liberties, privacy, or anything affecting us here at home. They were about information we had vis-a-vis China, Russia, Iran, others.
The Guardian has published a series of articles based on information provided by Snowden. First, The Guardian revealed the National Security Agency is collecting telephone records of millions of Verizon customers under a secret court order issued in April. Then, The Guardian revealed the existence of a top-secret program codenamed PRISM, where the NSA obtained access to the central servers of 9 major internet companies, including Google, Microsoft, Apple, Yahoo, and Facebook. The Guardian exposed how President Obama had ordered his senior national security and intelligence officials to draw up a list of potential overseas targets for U.S. cyber attacks.
Given the fact of an open investigation, I'm not going to dwell on Mr. Snowden's actions or his motivations. I will say that our nation's defense depends in part on the fidelity of those entrusted with our nation's secrets. If any individual who objects to government policy can take it into their own hands to publicly disclose classified information, then we will not be able to keep our people safe or conduct foreign policy.
And then The Guardian revealed details about an NSA data mining tool called Boundless Informant that details and even maps by country the voluminous amount of information it collects from computer and telephone networks. A top-secret NSA global heat map shows that in March 2013, the agency collected 97 billion pieces of intelligence from computer networks worldwide. The NSA most frequently targeted Iran, Pakistan, Jordan, Egypt, and India. The Boundless Informant documents also showed the agency collected almost 3 billion pieces of intelligence from U.S. computer networks over a 30-day period ending in March of 2013.
I wanted you to be the last one to interview. Why? We've met twice. I have some interesting quotes from some of the speakers. I will be showing it on the screen just to take your opinion upon their obligations or their cause. I didn't always meet people that find you guilty. I've met people that sees you in a different way, and we'll hear some of their testimonies. As I go back for the point is that why did I want you to be by the end of this? Because it's not about my opinion. It's about trying as much as possible to present both opinions on the current America or the future America from different personals. And I know how much people trust you and trust your point of view throughout my experience at least, and how it shows all over the world. That's the first video I want you to hear.
He's a Russian citizen, isn't he? At least he lives in Russia.
Edward Snowden, what do you think of this link?
Traitor. I'm not a journalist. I can have views that are pretty simple in that regard. And he may be an interesting guy to interview, maybe an interesting person, but I would say he's a traitor.
Did he explain why, or just?
He explained, but at least this is what he said. Let's hear someone else, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Why? Why would he say it this way?
I would prefer to see him hanged by the neck until he was dead, rather than merely electrocuted.
You'd have to ask Jim Woolsey that. I find that comment reprehensible. I have a lot of disagreement with what Edward Snowden did. I would never say something like that. I think he should stand trial. He's charged with crimes. He divulged very sensitive intelligence information. to foreign intelligence services as well as publicly. He damaged U.S. intelligence and national security, but I think he deserves to have his day in court and to be determined whether or not he is guilty of those crimes and what his sentence should be. Again, Edward Snowden could have shown his displeasure and disagreement with some of the intelligence community's actions and policies in other ways. He could have went to Congress, but he decided to abscond, to leave the country with secrets, and he did a lot of damage. There were things that needed to be addressed, and so all of his grievances, all of his complaints were not illegitimate by any means. It's the way he went about it. When you become an intelligence officer, you swear an oath of allegiance to the United States government, to the Constitution, and that you're going to protect the secrets of this country. And Edward Snowden didn't do that. He did not carry out his duties as he was not only expected to do, but that he was constitutionally obliged to do.
I mean, it's, you can tell from my reaction, there's so many things he says that are, you know, they shouldn't be funny, but they are funny.
Now I've lost my battery. I wanted you to hear what Frank Puglisi said about that, because
you can see. Does anyone have a charger?
Yeah, never mind. I'll just say it, and I'll share it later. He said, "Well, Edward knows that even if there was a harm, which he believes that you harmed your government, it's a secret harm."
Yeah, right.
Why are you laughing?
Because it's like it's almost a religious statement. We believe there's this harm, but only believers know it.
He did damage. He did damage. No one wants to talk about that. But some of the damage he did was very classified damage, right? So that's difficult to talk about. But
non-believers, they can never see it. They can never smell it. They can never touch it. But it's still true. Well, I don't go to the church of the CIA. You know, I don't worship at the altar of the FBI. I'm an American, and I believe in the public truth shared by everyone. Jeb Bush says traitor. Doesn't explain why, just says traitor. You see, John Brennan says caused harm, but doesn't explain why. You see Frank Puglisi, and he says causes harm, and I believe it caused harm, but it's a secret, and I just can't tell you. It's just, it's so important that no one knows, but it is real. Then it becomes the question, the real question is, all right, if you can't tell us what the harm is, what qualifies as harm?
Nobody in NSA was killed because of Edward Snowden's leaks, right? This was all policy information. This was legal information. This was how our government agencies are interpreting the law.
So we have three people who you've shown, all three of whom are being openly dishonest. And the funny thing about it is they're not even trying hard. They're not being particularly clever. You know, they're not coordinating and thinking this through. It's a reflex. When you hear the name Ed Snowden, what do you think? Traitor, traitor. Why? They don't have that level, right? They just know, here is a person who exposed our bad behavior. We don't like them. We go, oh, well, in the case of John Brennan, the information that he provided was legitimate. We should have known about it, but he told us the wrong way. Well, what is the right way?
But I can tell you that it was not the only way. There were a lot of things that he could have done. He could have went to the Inspector General of the NSA or the CIA. He could have went to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. He could have even gone to U.S. media outlets, to the New York Times, the Washington Post, because those newspapers do respect national security issues.
Isn't that what he's done? This is what he shared all what he have.
No, he did it publicly. He didn't do it without any type of review by the intelligence community.
I tried to comply with the rules, but the rules are designed to suppress the information from getting out.
Yeah. You're right.
So by the time some pieces of information came out, it was almost 4 years later, even more than that, actually.
No,
6
more.
years later.
Yeah.
And it was only part of the story. And by then, any sort of reform was like, well, that was 6 years ago. You know, we can't go back and punish the people who did something 6 years ago. We'll all just move on now. So, you know, I think one of the things that's important to understand is what they call whistleblower protection laws are actually whistleblower suppression procedures that they try to make sure that your information does not get out in a way that it could be understood by the public.
The United States government refuses to provide a fair trial. They're bringing charges under a specific law that provides no defense for the public interest, right? You can't say what the CIA was doing is a crime. Does the jury want to have known about that or not known about that? They refuse to allow that in the courtroom. He says go to Congress, but if you go to Congress, you go to prison. There were no protections for me to go to Congress in the way he thinks that an American government employee could have, because I was a contractor. And at the time, the whistleblower laws only protected actual staff employees of government. But even in the most generous interpretation, what all of these men are doing is they're saying, yes, we broke the law. Yes, the public should have known about these things. And yes, someone told us about it. But he told us in a way that we didn't approve of. And so he's a traitor.
What I said was that Snowden has violated the law, that he had to be punished if he gets under the domination of the United States, and he knows that. But that the revelation of what has been done, not the details of it, but the fact that we were listened to and with our telephone calls and our cell phones and everything else, was something that's now precipitated a debate even among members of Congress who didn't know about it ahead of time before him. So in general, it opens up the question of how much intricacies should be given to the government to extract from our communications that were not really known about by the American public. So I think that part of it has been good. But what Snowden did is obviously a serious violation of the law.
So can I say that killing Bin Laden or capturing Bin Laden was one of your greatest achievements?
Well, I think it was something that certainly the CIA was determined to do as soon as those attacks occurred on 9/11. We knew that Bin Laden was the mastermind. We knew that he had other plans to carry out attacks. And so a generation of CIA officers worked hard to find Bin Laden and to bring him to justice. But it wasn't just the CIA. We worked very closely with the FBI, with the US military. The American people deserved it, certainly the victims of 9/11. And although there were almost 3,000 killed on 9/11, many of them were foreign citizens. They weren't just American citizens. There were so many tourists and foreigners who were in that area at the time. So we felt that it was an obligation that we had, not just to our fellow Americans, but also to people around the world, to be able to stop the scourge of Bin Laden's terrorism.
Out of the blue, 3,000 innocent people were killed by terrorists with cold blood. But I hope I clarified what happened after that. Out of the blue, the truth is out there. But still, many are paying the price, even though they didn't commit any crime. It's very obvious millions lost their lives. It's very obvious privacy is not anyone's right anymore. And what's even more obvious, that millions lost their freedom and its principles, and out of the blue, Americans and beyond are still paying the price.
خلص اللي انت قاعد تعمله اول بعدين سوي اللي انا قاعد اسويه اللي انت كنت ناوي تسويه سوى اوكي ونكمل اوكي
So Jeb Bush, when I said Edward Snowden, he answered by saying a traitor. Then what would you say? Edward Snowden.
Courageous.
Not a hero?
I think that traitor-hero trope is dangerous. I don't think Edward Snowden would call himself a hero. So I can certainly recognize that he's courageous. He fulfilled the oath of office that he took and protected against any constitutional infringement, whether that was by some enemies of the United States or by people in the agencies that are there to protect our constitutional rights.
If telling the truth about a government's crimes is itself a crime, you aren't free.